Hi, this is Paul. I'm recording this on Friday, September 10. And this morning, upper left-hand corner, Google algorithm feeds me up this video from a channel I'd never even heard of. Everyone's losing their minds. And so I listened to a little bit of it. What does she mean, everyone's losing their minds? Well, it's a good thing to think about, because what it means is that multiple people are in some ways not on the same page in terms of what they think and feel and know to be true and right. Now, this very much aligns with what Rebel Wisdom and John Vervaeke call collective cognition. But notice we call it thinking, but it's a lot deeper than thinking, because thinking is sort of this thing that we do when we process. It's a lot more like we're all seeing the world, but we're seeing different worlds. And we've grown accustomed to this now politically. And, all the fights over vaccines and COVID and vaccine passports and, political disputes, people seem to be seeing different worlds. Now, we're kind of used to that when it comes to people of radically different cultures or languages. We're not used to seeing that, let's say, in our own countries, within our own political parties or our own political structures. And that has caused a great deal of anxiety. And again, we're really talking something a lot more, we're talking about seeing more than thinking. So the strange thing about us is that even though we're individuals, and even though we have a consciousness, and I have sort of this internal monologue and in this internal story that I call me, and I have this body and I'm all wrapped up in skin and all of this stuff, we never mind alone. We always mind together. And that's something deeply human about us. But we're not really quite sure exactly how this works. Now, anger is often a tell, and Jordan Peterson, I think, is one of the best lines about this, about people don't like getting poked in their axioms, and there's a lot of that going on in this. Now, I was originally going to entitle this video Justice and Other Spirits of Desire. In my long video about marriage equality, I talked about the book, I keep forgetting the title of this book. I keep having another title, which I know is not the title of this book that I think of, but it's basically High on God. That's the title of the book. Justice is a spirit. Now, we often use justice as if it's this self-evident thing out there. But if that were the case, wouldn't we all have the same assumptions about what justice curtails and what justice means? Now, because tomorrow is 9/11 and it's 20 years since the attacks of 9/11, the media is full of retrospectives on the event. And of course, one of my favorite ones is done by Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook on their little podcast, The Rest is History. And part of what I really enjoy their podcast is because they're not Americans. And what they afford me, often the names that they drop and the references and even some of the times their language goes right over my head. What are they saying? America and England is two countries separated by a common language. But one of the things I appreciate about them is that they give me a perspective that is different from my own. And so especially with something like 9/11, it was really fun listening to what they had to say. And I was watching, Netflix has a 9/11 series, and just about everybody seems to have one now. And I was watching the Netflix one with my wife, and just the film of those planes going into the towers and the wreckage at the Pentagon and the story of the airliner that the passengers brought down. Boy, it's all the feels. It's 20 years ago, so now I'm in my late 50s. 20 years ago is not that long ago for me. And I, just like the generation before me, now I was born the year that Kennedy was assassinated, but the generation before me, and some of them are still in my church, could say exactly where they were and what they felt when Kennedy was assassinated. I know I was in my living room. By 2001, we had 5 small children, and so mornings were busy getting them up, getting them dressed, getting breakfast in them. That day, I had to go drive to the Bay Area with a group of other people from my denomination for some classical business. And we're at home, and we never watch TV in the morning. We're too busy getting 5 kids ready for the day and homeschooling and all of those kinds of things. And a member of the church called me up and said, "Are you watching TV?" And we said, "No. Why would we?" "Turn on the TV." And I turned on the TV, and I had grown up in Patterson, just 16 miles to the west of New York City, and had visited New York City very often. It's a very short distance. In fact, 16 miles in Sacramento is nothing. Seems like a world in the highly compressed New York metropolitan area. But then I saw the headlines: World Trade Center towers collapsed. Of course, there's a 3-hour time difference between there and here. So a lot had gone on the East Coast while I was sleeping or just getting up and getting kids ready. And I just looked at the TV, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. Seeing, mind. And so now, watching the 20-year retrospectives, all the feels are back, and anger and vengeance, and it's a spirit of desire for justice that takes over. And my wife, she was feeling the same thing and saying similar things. And she said, it's just so ironic that the United States now pulls off out of Afghanistan just before the 20th, when just in our minds, quick a minute, it's like we want to bomb them all over again. But who's them? So the rest is history. Noted that right from the start, the Bush administration decided this was going to be an act of war and not a police terrorism response. The Godfather, the original movie, begins with this amazing scene of a father whose daughter has been abused by a young man. And this is the wedding day of the Godfather, and the tradition holds that the Godfather cannot deny a request made on his daughter's wedding day. And so the undertaker goes to the Godfather and says, "This man abused my daughter, and I want him dead. I want justice." And the Godfather, who is no paragon of morality, obviously, has a number of things to say to him about the instrumental nature of their relationship. And he also points out that, was your daughter killed? Well, no. Well, you're not asking for justice. You want revenge. And then, of course, he weaves the web. Well, if you were to be my friend, then your enemies would fear you because they fear me. These are powerful spirits. And you might say, no, justice is, well, did you ever stop and ask yourself, what is justice? It's not an easy thing to define. And so often we are filled with, spirit is about the only word we have. And desire. One of the things that the podcast really brought out well is in some ways how George W. Bush was transformed. George W. Bush came into office, and he was not going to follow in Bill Clinton's footsteps of nation building and American adventurism, and he was not going to do that. But the attacks of 9/11 completely changed him in a way in terms of his response. And I think quite rightly, Dominic and Tom Holland asked, could it have been any other way? And I was listening to this while I was picking up my daughter from work. And I thought, no, the nation, I told my daughter, I said, if George W. Bush hadn't acted the way that the nation felt. The entire nation was possessed, most of the nation, possessed by a spirit. He would have been impeached. There was no question the superpower was going to flex its muscles and have the world cower. And he gets on the phone and he basically says, "Are you with us or against us?" The rest of the world, with, not against. Because there was some bombing we were going to do. And of course, later on, the passions subside, and, well, 20 years now, we're sort of making assessments. After the death of George Floyd, after he was killed by a police officer, a religious spirit of justice seized many in the nation. And we all noted the very particular religious language, religious liturgies, and liturgies include what we did with our bodies, when, where, and how. Public confessions of white privilege. The movement of spirits totally took over atheist communities. Oh, no. We're all rationality and materialism. But then why do you act this way? Any ancient person would say, you're possessed of a spirit. Falling in love is being possessed of a spirit. We're possessed of spirits all the time. Well, what are these spirits? Well, I've talked a lot about school spirit, which I think is one of the sort of legacy usages of the word that we can still connect to, because if a school has good school spirit, it sweeps along the students into flourishing. And if the school has a very negative school spirit, it's very hard to get an education. Yeah, what is this spirit? Well, we've built it into the architecture. It's a manifestation of the leadership of the school, of the student body of the school. Everyone wants to have a productive school spirit, but nobody quite knows how to make the school spirit. My conversation with Vervaeke and J.P. Marceau, towards the end of it, this idea of sort of these levels of seeing came to my mind. The cornfield, what does the cornfield know of the farmer who plants it? Now, if you look at things that talk about the secret life of plants, plants are really very sophisticated. They know a lot of things, but they know almost nothing of the farmer. They know very little of the farmer's dog. Yeah, the dog knows something of the corn, and the dog knows something of the farmer. But if you've ever had a dog, and you think for a while about what exactly you look like to the dog, and you try to resist a lot of projection upon the dog, well, it's a very strange image of what the dog knows of you. But the Iowa farmer knows the cornfield, and the Iowa farmer knows the dog at levels that the dog in the cornfield cannot know. And in fact, the Iowa farmer is managing the dog in the cornfield at levels that even the dog in the cornfield in their management have no idea of. And so when you see these things happen around us, towers go down and a spirit grips us. Well, they're our towers, and we have layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of formation and grooming and cultivation and identity and history. And it's school spirit is just a small, tiny little illustration of everything that suddenly the spirit that inhabits and possesses us and changes history. Peter Boghossian wrote an open letter of resignation to his college. And Barry Weiss posted it on her Substack, and I'll leave a link for it below. It's a very interesting letter. It's a very moving letter where he basically tells the story of his dismissal. He says in this letter, I continued to believe, perhaps naively, that if I exposed the flawed thinking on which Portland State's new values were based, I would shake the university from its madness. This is a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reality, which he has had a very brutal lesson. It's a remarkable letter. I very much recommend you read it. Reason? No. No. We are not reasonable creatures. We are moved by the spirits that are around us, among us. And it's a terrifying thought because, sort of like Neo in the Matrix, we don't like to think we're not in charge of our own destiny. This doesn't mean that human beings aren't employing reason in terms of their argument. An ancient person would say this is war in the Heavenlies. The rationalistic spirit that Peter Boghossian had, like school spirit, contributed to and developed and worked on with his friends and tried to illustrate, and all of this pouring his life and books and all of this into a particular spirit, the spirit lost. The spirits were in conflict. Another spirit is possessing the community that he loves. That spirit abused him through the people, mistreated him, and spewed him out. And he basically says, I thought we were about a different spirit. I was not in line with the spirit. I didn't walk with the spirit. Again, if you haven't watched my rough draft for Sunday, I'm working with a lot of this stuff with Paul. And when I say war in the heavenlies, what do you mean in the heavenlies? In the heavenly realms. Well, what do I mean by that? Just like the farmer is above the dog, is above the corn, these spirits are out there. Now, where they come from, how they have power, we certainly are a part of it. Absolutely. I'm not in any way denying any of that. These spirits go through and flow through history, but some of them are so enduring that, like the spirit of the desire for justice, they're built into our DNA. Again, Peterson and cognitive scientists work on that, and this is what we're talking about. Reason is certainly being used as persuasion and weapons in this spiritual warfare, but something more powerful than reason is clearly possessing them, because Peter Boghossian's attempts at arguing them out of them, and James and Helen Pluckrose too, the hoaxsters, to no avail. Why not? Because human beings are spiritual creatures. We are creatures of desire. Now, you can obviously see the conditioning when, George Bush, I'm sure his approval ratings were at their peak when he was, well, what was he? He was the decider, certainly, but he played this role. He's there with the firefighters. Your leader is here. Your leader will make sure that justice is done. And listen to his speech there at Ground Zero. The world will hear us. Oh, and they did. The 9/11 wars, as the rest of history guys called them. But of course, these other individuals, now we call them all sorts of names, but they were certainly moved by a spirit. They were moved by a spirit, committed enough to have their own lives taken by it and to say spiritual things as they drove planes into buildings. And as I mentioned, one of the real insights of the rest of history on 9/11 was the observation that Tom Holland made that, well, many of these individuals saw the idea of Western law, the United Nations Code of Human Rights. Well, that's just all sneaky Christianity that you're imposing upon us. It's an alien spirit to our spirit. And so if we can get the Americans to torture us and break down their own international law and all of that scheme, we win. Wow. And at the end of the video, they note that, well, America's reputation took a real beating in the pictures of Abu Ghraib, in Iraq, in Guantanamo, among its reputation. But so did Islam. Islam is now associated with individuals like these guys become the face of Islam. But everybody's seeing the world differently. They have different minds. They have different spirits. Different things are moving them through the world. Now, what do we do in church? Again, high on God. I'm not going to read any more of it today, but I'm going to get into more of it next week, I think. We groom, develop, assess, refine these sensitivities with intentionality. We create spirit and we mold it. And we take spirits and we let them inside of us and have spirits mold us and shape us. We rehearse, participate, enjoy the feels. It's one of the power of the megachurch. You know, just looking at those videos from 9/11 and seeing everyone, didn't matter their skin color, didn't matter their ethnic background, all those New Yorkers, we're one. And I right there, I'm feeling the feels with them. I surely am. And thinking, it's such a gratifying thing to be part of a group. We feel strong. We feel powerful. And when we've been wronged, we feel right. And we believe that whatever we lay our hands to will be justice. Those spirits recede and conversations start. And it's a good thing, because if you just respond, well, you can see my sermon about acts of the flesh. Wellman talks about emotional energy, but that language just seems so weak. We evaluate, we check, we consider, we debate. You can see this from below as real spiritual work. And again, see, I'm not sanitizing my language. What secularity basically is a giant sanitation program where we sanitize language to take certain keywords out, and then we all feel better that this is all accessible to us and we're in charge. We're not in charge. Spirits are grabbing us. And we're not. That should be no surprise to us. Our desires, spirits, they're all around us. Now, this is obviously before and beyond church. I picked up Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Sun Tzu said, in the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is no good. So too, it is better to recapture an army entire than to destroy it. To capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company entire than to destroy it. We colonize. That's the best of all possible things. And America is this amazing empire because we don't have to fire a shot. We have art and we have movies and we have ideas. And again, one of the amazing things in this retrospective and the rest of history is that Satan in Islam is a little different from Satan in Christianity. He's a tempter more than sort of a paragon of evil. And so the U.S. is the great Satan because we're just tempting them all and luring them all into our ideas. They're not so impressed by our reason. They love our movies and our music and our songs. And it's the height of irony that Al-Qaeda was, for the most part, made up of middle-class and wealthy individuals who, in their off times, they're just taking in Western movies. Strange, aren't we? This is how we conquer. We conquer because you want to see our art, even if it's populist. This is how we work. This is how we rule the world, through culture. Now, as the critical drinker and others note, I read an article I don't remember where I read it, but part of why China's doing so good in Africa is they're kind of tired of the Western scolding. Critical drinker and his art about movie making, well, He's looking for the old movies, the movies that had all the feels, that inspired us, the movies that through which spirit comes. Good video by Luke Burgess that someone pointed me to on YouTube. It's on Chris Williamson's channel. Why do we want what we want? And this is sort of a secularist view of Rene Girard's work. It's mimetic desire. And now what's been so interesting as I think about religion, and I watch more of the secularized versions of self-improvement and working on very similar things to what I work on, just I haven't sanitized it with getting rid of all of the what secularists view as religious language. Why are we interested in figuring out where we get our desires? Now, again, sort of this Cartesian dualism, we think, well, we get our desires. Well, you're talking spirits. Spirits are these, just try and not use that word for a week. It's hard. Why do we want to know where our desires come from? Well, we want to know where our desires come from so we can pick which desires we want and avoid which desires we don't want to get the outcomes that we desire. Well, there's something a little circular about this. Well, I want the good things. Well, why do you think that those things are good? Well, because everybody else is wanting them. And suddenly we get a sense of, well, why the world is going crazy, because we're wanting different things. Some of the things we want in common, and some of the things we want because we think they will achieve the ends that we want. And, where the dead reckoning for goodness is not completely off, but we want to understand mimetic desire in a very secularized way so we can somehow figure out how to manipulate other people's desires. Because, and in one place in the conversation, it was really quite fascinating because, well, maybe I should cue it up.
There has to be equivalents of like a first mover, right? As you said with the kids, you got the kids in the play area, and let's say that they're all doing nothing. Then one does something. Now that something can have been iterated on a mimetic desire that they saw yesterday, or that they saw 2 weeks ago, or that they watched mum do in the car on the way here or something. But there does have to be a first mover. So there has to be gradations of...
And is he right there? So where's the first moving coming from? I mean, we're almost in Aristotle land.
How mimetic certain desires are that we have. There are certain people who step further outside of the Overton window of what is normal acceptable behavior with regards to their desires, and there are others that are slap bang in the middle of the normal distribution.
Yes, I think thinking of it as a gradation or as a spectrum of mimesis is exactly the right way to think about it. So let's take the little girl in the room who picks up a bright red fire truck. She may pick up that fire truck because her dad is a firefighter, and that's the reason why she was the first mover. So it has nothing to do with the other kids in the room. It has to do with some external factor, or something,
or it has to do with another layer of mimetic desire that is going. First mover, that's exactly the right terminology. So you're just bringing another first mover from one room into another.
She saw on TV the day before. But it could have nothing to do with that. It could just be because the color red is just this like bright red color, and all of the other toys are have dull colors. And there's some.
Or why does she like red? Well, that's mimetically sourced as well. And well, as a parent, because everybody around her liked red, and
some kind of instinctual response where the red was attractive. I mean, we know this in animals with birds and flowers. So perhaps there is an instinctual basis for people moving towards things and desiring it.
And we're sort of back to C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, where instinct, well, the question, instinct doesn't really answer this because there are so many instincts.
And then the mimesis maybe follows that. So I think there's all kinds of reasons why somebody could be a first mover. Different gradations, and the trick is kind of like getting to the source, right? Getting to the bottom of it.
Now, the trick is, well, what do you mean the trick? Well, what do we want? Well, we want to be the source. Well, we want to be the source. Why? so we can get what we want. But where does our want come from? You see, there's a circularity that goes in here, and this whole conversation was really an excellent conversation. So I just wanted to play a little bit of it and give you a sense of it, but I really thought it was good. What we want is to wield this power, and well, why do we want to wield the power? Where does this come from? Well, of course, being a minister, I'd say Genesis 3, but even and that even doesn't come from us there. It comes from the serpent. Where did the serpent get its from? And ancient arguments and ideas just come flooding in. The communal pursuit of ideals and, well, Jesus and God. Jesus is God. Part of what's beautiful about the Peugeot-Peterson conversation is, well, we have these ideals, and we desire these ideals, and we desire these ideals mimetically, and we compete for these ideals. And if things are lined up in a certain way, we're completing productively for these ideals, and we're creating communities that strive after and achieve these ideals, and we reinforce these ideals. And this, again, is why I say church isn't going away. It takes lots of different forms. People are doing lots of different things, but hierarchies are going to develop, and we're going to be pursuing them. And the game isn't over. And you just at some point have to ask older and deeper questions about, well, how can we pursue the good? How can we know the good? How can we refine our knowledge of the good? What is better in terms of our priorities and the time and money and energy that we spend on this or that or this or that? To what degree can we, once we recognize mimetic desire, once you have that idea, that there's a degree, it affords you a degree of self-transcendence, and you watch people around and say, whoa, well, there's mimetic desire going here, and I can anticipate where that is going because I have seen all of these patterns in the past, and then if I respond in these different ways, people are going to respond, but the way I want them to respond, and if I poke them in their axioms, they'll just get defensive. So we are spiritual seekers. We want to be the first cause. And we recognize that even in our own little sandboxes and playrooms, well, you can be the first cause in the playroom. You go and you look for that red fire truck. The deconstruction. Well, we're spiritual multi-factor authenticating. We're saying, well, okay, well, we've got this book here, and we've got this reason here, and we've got this idea here, but that mimetic desire is very much playing on, well, how do I be high status? Because I want status. And again, back to Peterson and his lobsters. Gaining status makes me feel like top lobster. Losing the status fight sends me to the bottom. Oh, but now I self-transcend and see the status fight. And so we must do this together. Participation. That's how we're built. We desire the archetypal and the communal. This is why we are incurably religious, even if, as in secularity, we try to sanitize all the words. Again, there's a lot of good stuff in this week's Q&A, so if you haven't listened to it, I know the Q&As aren't your cup of tea. Someone always, and you'll see him because I always pin his comment, always then after the Q&A puts all the timestamps in, and I copy that up to the text too, and I really appreciate when he does that. This is the most meaningful thing we can do, and doing it together makes it even more meaningful than doing it alone, and doing it as communities. And so when the towers come down, we all stand together. And what we do in church especially is we all practice this, and we experience the feels and the meaning. And this is part of the reason why there's all kinds of hand-wringing in churches over things, but these things aren't going away. They just take different forms. And being out there on your own, well, now via the internet, we're going to commune together and subscribe to channels and use certain buzzwords as their holy words, and on and on and on and on. We're seeking spirits because we love for these spirits to come upon us. And part of what High on God talks about, and you can go visit it, is go into a room with, thousands of people and singing anthems together and being one with the community and having this. And again, there's just myriad of complexities all the way on down the line. It's how we're built. And it is, of course, clash of civilizations. 9/11 was not an incidental date chosen for the attack. And part of, again, with these, I really did think that their retrospection was a cut above. And they're humble, and they're just doing a podcast. They don't have all the pretty pictures and films that the major networks will have. But their platforms, and they're both subject to mimetic desire and trying to be first movers in mimetic desire and trying to grab our attention. And the book has a great idea. Symbolic language and the development of stories, beliefs, and doctrines extend across human history, from early cave covered in handprints to red splotched screens in one megachurch, symbolizing sinful human blood that could only be cleansed by the innocent blood of Jesus. These collections of images and heritage of symbols reified in megachurches are part of our study. Indeed, our work on megachurches, we see a similar enumeration of symbols and ritual actions that collect over time. And of course, this is true of lots of churches, of every church. And of cultures and nations, flags, and all of those spirits inhabited us in those moments, which accompany the manifestation of ritual forms. Our megachurches did not arise in a vacuum. As we will show, there's a collection of symbols and ideologies that are at play in the 12 megachurches we studied, contributed to and helped shape their aesthetics, doctrines, and theologies. They are a culmination of multiple American lineages, the musical choices, the aesthetics of the building, which feel like malls, schools, or theaters, but noticeably not cathedrals, and the conservative political undercurrent that remains despite cultural changes based on local and national shifts across time. In short, there's a heritage of symbols that guides and helps renew the emotional energy in these services of worship. Beliefs do remain an important part of the ritual process and the emotional energy it creates in megachurches. We, however, reframe how to talk about beliefs. We use Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis to contextualize belief into a ritual system, because it is through interaction rituals, we argue, that belief gains their force and resilience. We've done a lot of talking on this channel about propositional beliefs, but and we've always maintained that they are integral in 4 Ps. You're going to lose something if you drop any one of those 4 Ps. But beliefs are part of the equation, and they go back in and forth. And the book talks about that. But I want to get at this other idea. The somatic marker hypothesis proposes that prior experiences and behaviors have varying degrees of effective valiance and salience. Now, there's some word salad for you, and a lot of you are saying, that sentence means nothing to me. This idea that they're calling a somatic marker hypothesis, which is a horrible name, proposes that prior experiences, where you were raised, who you lived with, the positive and the negative experiences that you had. I've been watching Hitman Heart, Life in the Shadows. Fascinating documentary. It's one that Jordan Peterson keeps recommending. It's on YouTube. It's worth watching. Have varying degrees, it's pretty obvious, of affective, that's our affect, sort of like emotions. Read Jonathan Edwards. Valiance, values, our emotional values, and salience hierarchy. What appears to us, what we see. And basically what he's saying is, if you were raised in a family that it was a healthy family and everybody loved their country and saluted the flag and those values came through, those are deep inside of you. They got there first in some ways, or very early. But they, of course, go way, way back. These spirits go through the ages continually. These qualities become attached to experiences and the symbols, flags, songs. Congress on the steps after 9/11 singing, "God bless America." God bless America. Let's all pray. This stuff is deep. Symbols, beliefs, and behaviors associated with them, creating a physiological signal. We feel it inside of us. A somatic marker. It's a marker, okay? A body marker, soma, of the original feeling that was experienced. And that's what happens when I watch the 9/11 retrospectives. I feel it again. But now it's different. You can see that from Inside Out, that little Pixar movie. There's all other colors in that little ball of that memory now. As Damasio argues, somatic markers are a special instance of feeling that have been connected by learning to predicted future outcomes and certain scenarios. Eschatology comes into this. What is eschatology? It's the future. Thus, when making decisions, materiality of the body remembers the feelings attached to the prior experiences through these somatic markers, thereby helping people to make decisions regarding what types of behavior to engage in. Suddenly, everybody's on their knees because George Floyd is dead. And they're all confessing and they're waving. And no, you're not watching Jesus Camp. You're watching woke atheists out in the middle earnestly in their church. And they've got all the same things. And what we're doing with our bodies, again, watch Peugeot and Peterson, these aren't arbitrary. They're certainly historical, but they're not arbitrary. Now, again, when we hear this, we're like, well, maybe we can hack these. Maybe we can do something with these and it'll make us rich. But isn't all that part of the mimetic desire too? We argue that it is in and through ritual experiences that somatic markers, again, the language, becomes attached to beliefs and symbols. It's through our lives that these first drafts that I talk about, they're all inside of us, these first draft maps. In addition, literature in the cognitive science of religion suggests that some beliefs, those characterized by, and this is key, minimally counterintuitive ideas. You go back and watch this thing about fashion in the video. Minimally counterintuitive ideas are remembered, shared, and spread through space and time more readily than other beliefs. Why? They've got to be different enough to grab our salience, but not too different for us to not be able to relate to it. Bin Laden and Bush had enough in commonality in terms of what Tom Holland calls universal ideas, but enough difference, Christianity and Islam, that they can be different. We argue that this is at least partly because such minimally counterintuitive ideas, I should put that one in blue so I can find it again, resonate with our affective systems, our emotional systems, our affect, more readily than other ideas and are thus more likely to be associated with strong somatic markers. Minimally counterintuitive beliefs are those that are counterintuitive enough to grab your attention, like time travel or an omniscient spirit, but not so counterintuitive that they become confusing or disorienting, like the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics, space-time continuum, Christian apophatic, and mystical theology. Luke, Nate. That's why you lose your audience. Minimally counterintuitive. Counterintuitive enough, minimal enough. Presenting God as Father who is like an unconditionally loving parent, except that he is omniscient and can hear your thoughts and shift reality in your favor, is a quintessential example of a minimally counterintuitive idea. Okay, back to the beautiful beginning of McGilchrist's little essay upon which the big book is. Oh, but now I explain it, so now I can see that that's just BS. Really? Really? Is it BS? Or is it built into you? Because one of the big impacts of Peterson and Peugeot has been kind of the exorcism of the arbitrary. Said, no, these things aren't arbitrary because otherwise we wouldn't see the patterns. Oh, but just maybe they're old. Yeah, they're old. But you value old, archetypos. In addition, we regularly witness throughout our interviews the megachurch members and during participant observation how compelling the belief that only the innocent blood of Jesus can overcome sin and the stain of our guilty blood for attendees. The notion that blood must be shed in the wake of wrongdoings. We want to kill those people that took down our buildings and shed the blood of our. You didn't know those people. No, but they're Americans. All the symbols connect us. If not intuitive or instinctual moral impulse. However, Jesus' presence in the story is notably counterintuitive, that God would send God's own son to be an innocent, sinless, sacrificial lamb. Not only that, but his blood, Jesus' blood, from above, embodies counterintuitive strength. It not only pays for sin, but it creates a capital that miraculously overcomes and pays the price of all human sin until the end of time. This idea sustains the premise that not only one sin, but all human sin can be innocent of one human's blood. Because Jesus is God, human sin can be atoned for. Jesus is called our substitute. Jesus pays our penalty. Just read the Heidelberg Catechism. It's just all right here. Jesus achieves victory over death. Jesus has merit to overcome our human debt. Jesus is the example of our example for his followers, and anyone who comes after him should sacrifice themselves for him and others. These minimally counterintuitive combinations serve as powerful invitations. Minimally counterintuitive. Fashion?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially on social media, because you have people that get to the top, right? So they have a power law advantage because more people, proportionally far more people, see their content. And then they look at it and they think, oh, well, Luke's got good reach with that tweet. So I'll add that into the library of potential mimesis strategies. And then, oh, Luke's done it again. He's done it again with that same sort of tweet. And you see this, right? You see this with different structures, whether it's putting clap emojis in between each word or whether it's using a particular hashtag. Like, what is a hashtag? It's other people saying this is a trend. This is something else that I agree with. And a lot of what people are trying to do there is achieve success through the adoption of that trend. Here's something that's worked well. That's a signal of high value, high status, intellect, humor, whatever. Therefore, I'm going to adopt it. I'm going to absorb it into myself.
Yeah, you see it all the time on social media. Like when one person develops a certain tactic, all of a sudden you start seeing it everywhere. It's imitated everywhere. And maybe the origin of that was some, program of how to get more engagement in 30 days or something like that, right? So people start doing all kinds of funny things like asking these questions. And, you can almost just sniff it out, right, as soon as you see it. But imitating, there's a lot of cargo cult stuff happening, not only on social media, but in the startup world, for instance. And it's like imitating sort of the external things, like will magically bring about some kind of result. So you see entrepreneurs like imitating all kinds of like surface level things, like ways of dressing, ways of working, kind of lifestyles, like the ways even that we communicate in our email exchanges. Like there was this like hyper mimetic trend while I was living in California where like all of a sudden it seemed like overnight, like nobody wanted to use capital letters in emails anymore. And it was like, it's not cool. It means that you're not busy. And
it was kind of a bad idea. I remember that because it's like, capitals actually, they're a technology that actually has a meaning and a purpose. So they got abandoned pretty quick.
Enough if you have to capitalize the first word of your sentences and use punctuation. And it's like in the course of a year, man, I'm not kidding. Like that just happened. So there's like this imitation of like all these like funny external things that have very, very little to bear on the success of the company or on the valuation, right? On the value creation. So, what we're imitating is very important. Is it like the superficial external things? Like, are we doing that with some like auto magical expectation that if I put these 3 emojis after all of my tweets, suddenly, I will, have the following that Elon Musk has? No, it doesn't work like that.
If I wear the black turtleneck, then I get all of the insights from creativity and marketing that Steve Jobs had. This is what we saw with Elizabeth Holmes, right, from Theranos, a woman who was a complete shyster and a total con artist, very successfully so. And she wore a turtleneck the same way that Steve Jobs did. There's actually clips on YouTube, if you look hard enough, of her real voice.
Changing her voice.
Yeah, so she lowered her voice to imitate the men that were in the industry, because she thought that having a lower voice would signal that she was more masculine, more disagreeable, more conscientious, more industrious, harder working. But the product that they created, what was it called? The Winston or something? What was the thing that they made?
Oh, I forget the name of the actual product. Yeah.
Some famous scientist from the 1900s, they named this thing the Edison. That was it.
That's right.
But that was shit. Total shit. Didn't do what it was supposed to do at all. But she'd got all the surface area stuff. She'd got all of the easy to achieve things. Here's another thing, man, that I think about a lot. Scott Alexander put this on his blog a little while ago, talking about how fashions work 2 rungs apart in terms of class or group hierarchy. So if you're upper class, Kim Kardashian, let's say, you can wear heels with a pair of popper-sided jogger tracksuit bottoms to an awards ceremony, and people are going to think, oh yeah, that's so cool. It's like the clothes of the underclass. It's the clothes of sort of the street chav, but worn by someone who's really, really classy. But if you're only 1 rung above them, if you're perhaps lower middle class, you can't get away with that because you're so close that you could be confused. The signal that you're giving off in the mimesis isn't a signal of, I'm so cool that I can wear something that's 2 rungs below me, or I am so rich, even though I might be in a sort of lower middle class or an underclass position, that I can wear what the people above me are. I just look this way and I'm above my station, basically. So you need to have these gaps. So the way that people model stuff and who they choose is also a signal in itself, right? Okay, what is this going to adopt within me? What am I trying to say with this? Is there any confusion that this might actually be me slipping down a peg as opposed to moving up a peg?
Just gotta have that gap just right.
It's brilliant. And that has everything to do with what we talked about earlier, that Kim Kardashian can do that because she lives in a different world. So it's not confusing. She's going far enough away into, it's an external world for her, right? External mediators of desire and internal mediators. So she's going far enough away so it's not confusing. Where if she sort of stayed in the world of celebrity and did something, it could create a lot of conflict. So that has to do with the distinction of like what world do the models occupy. And we see that in all kinds of different domains. The interesting thing with Elizabeth Holmes, though, I have to add, is that what she did, like we can say that it's silly, we can joke about the black turtlenecks, but to some extent it worked in the sense that she created an aura around her.
Alchemy, man.
Alchemy. It was total alchemy that got people, presumably very smart people. I mean, it's embarrassing if you watch the documentary, the amount of people, right, that are on there touting her. So in a sense, mimetic desire models like literally distort reality. We project all kinds of things onto models, like metaphysical things that they don't even possess. So there's a kind of a game that's being played. It's like who can make themselves out to be the right kind of a model. And if you can do that, you can raise, I forget, some ridiculous amount of money that Elizabeth Holmes was able to raise. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like the more money you're able to raise, the more people that you get, like, former heads of state, the more people don't even question. They now have models of desire to follow. And it makes the 7th and 8th and the 9th one extremely easy.
This stuff is happening all over the place. This world is a story of what we would call spiritual warfare. Now, again, part of what I'm trying to do is help us understand that when we're talking spirit, it's not something of a different substance that somehow, although again, we don't know. What does the cornfield know of the farmer? Religions are the oldest and highest level of analysis. It's not when Peterson again says when he has to default to religious language because it's the only language that works. It's not arbitrary. Secularity is sort of a stealth mode, and it conquered the world for a time, but it's leaving. Another thing from Sun Tzu: appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. And you find this with religions all the time, trying to look strong. Well, that's because they're weak. And secularity is, in a sense, really trying to not appear at all when, in fact, you're completely controlling with, well, this interesting version of Christianity, the second sister of the church. So just a few ideas. I didn't plan on reading that or playing that video, but they seem to fit. And again, part of what, okay, I'll pull that up too. It's war in the Heavenlies, spirits in conflict. We participate, but we're not passive participants. We're small. Again, school spirit. Can you change school spirit? Maybe. How? What can you do? Will you reason your school into school spirit? What are the tools? How does it work? How do you participate? Is it all from the outside where we say, oh, here's all this mimetic desire? Or do you actually have to go inside the story and work on it from within?